Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining. It's a full house. Beautiful. Hope everyone's well fed after lunch. Thanks for attending. My name is Mayank Dahilramani. I'm a Senior Alliance Manager here at Gitlab, and I manage our partnership with Google Cloud. I've had the pleasure of working with many different types of Googlers and different BUs, and basically working closely with Google to bring to market a solution for enterprise and organizations alike to adopt DevOps, particularly with GitLab and GCP for concurrent development and increasing agility in their business. So before we get started, a quick show of hands. How many people have heard of GitLab? Significant amount of you guys. Brilliant. How many of you guys have used GitLab? A good portion of you guys. Brilliant. Brilliant, brilliant, brilliant. So today what we will be doing is first we'll start off with level setting, giving a little bit of context of our discussion, talking about today's business and what does app and IT modernization really mean. And then we'll dive into a technology overview, right? What's GitLab and GCP all about? So we'll do a quick dive into the technology, and then we'll spend a significant amount of our time with customer stories, looking at proof points, validating how the solution works and what value it's providing to the business. And then from there, I'll give you a quick reading assignment. Offline literature on how to get started and where to learn more. So let's get started. Got a packed agenda and little time. What does today's business look like, right? What's going on with emerging technologies from an end user perspective and a business perspective? Two trends come to mind, right? From an end user perspective, whether you're a millennial or a Gen X that's a strong buyer in the consumer market, demanding technology to be defining their user experience with the product and services that they subscribe to or purchase. Or whether you're my grandmother at home, recently adopting a Rotimatic, and I kid you not, this is an actual machine that makes rotis that has an app associated with it that provides, that asks for user feedback so it can use AI and ML to improve the roti making experience, right? Everyone is looking at enhancing the user experience, software defined by software, whether it's pushing out updates to a Tesla vehicle to have better traction in the winter roads, or if it's Uber or Airbnb rolling out a feature in their cloud service. The whole product and services altogether are being enhanced with a software-defined user experience, and that's an emerging trend. And now it's become a norm by end users to demand that expectation, to demand that technologies must be infused, better enhance their experience, add convenience, and nowadays you're seeing the emergence of intelligence into products as well. On the flip side, to kind of address this demand, you're seeing the barrier of entry in adopting innovation lower and lower day by day. The access to cloud infrastructure, the thriving open source communities that are allowing you to take off-the-shelf projects and contribute back and add value, or consume right off the shelf and incorporate into your own projects in-house. It's lowering that barrier of innovation, the entry barrier of innovation, so you can build quickly, you can innovate and add functionality to your solutions and services and add value to your business immediately. And because that barrier of entry is becoming lower and lower and people are starting leveraging technologies like cloud, ML, big data, now it's becoming a very competitive market where first to market is your competitive advantage. You have to quickly iterate and you have to be first to market against your competitors to really be like the leader in your space, all right? So I use examples like Uber, Tesla, Airbnb. These are the most obvious examples, but it's not just limited to those industries. You're seeing companies in the financial sector, healthcare, et cetera, across the board in enterprise adopting the similar trends and enhancing their services, their solutions, and trying to optimize the delivery of new products and features. But when we talk about digital transformation, what does it really mean, right? Does it mean having web pages? All right, check. A mobile app? Check. Adding machine learning and big data? Check. But really, digital transformation, at the essence of it, at the core, is the ability to iterate. It's the ability to react fast and respond faster to the competition, right? Digital means fast. Digital means flexible. But today, that's not necessarily the case, right? How do we get to that end state? How do we get to the desired state when today's path to new functionality and new rollout is a legacy route, right? Adding value to the product is riddled with handoffs, right? Gatekeepers to infrastructure, security, and other operational dependencies. Silos are inevitably created because you've got one team that uses one tool, another team that uses another tool, and it becomes a game of telephone, where an end user may raise a support ticket. Support will tell dev, here's a feature or request enhancement. Dev will then tell QA, this is what we're doing, this is what we're building, we need it tested. QA will then go to security. At the end of the day, when the user finally gets the feature, the telephone game has had its effect. Well, that wasn't really what they were asking for. So how do we streamline this process? How do we break these silos and rid ourselves with some of that friction, right? Well, fundamentally, at the core of it, you need to tackle problems in a different way, right? If you look at it from a macro perspective, we're essentially today, traditionally, trying to tackle large problems over a long period of time. So by the time you've actually gathered your requirements, validated the vision, designed the solution, developed it, tested it, and then finally shipped it to get to your goal, your end target, well, the goal's moved because the business is evolving, the demands are changing, the end users are requiring something else, whether they're internal constituents or whether they're your external customers. So what we need to do is change that mentality of solving problems. Instead of making large leaps to solve milestones that take months to deliver quarterly releases, you need to look for a solution which can iteratively take smaller changes continually. And that's kind of like the essence of reducing the friction and adopting DevOps, is allowing for this MVC concept that we use at GitLab, the minimal viable commit, the smallest change, incremental step to reevaluate where to go next. So you're continually in line with what the business needs. So this is where I think GitLab and Google Cloud really shine, right? Enterprises and companies alike can bridge that gap with our products, and I'll be diving into that shortly, right? So we want to get to a current state, the legacy route, to a continuous state through DevOps. And to bridge that gap, at the heart of our solution, right, it really centers around people, process, and products, right? We want to enable people or teams, allow them to streamline their processes, and then through that process, they can adopting cutting-edge products and technology that enable them. So you'll see this common theme in the customer studies and proof points that we discuss later. But now that we've laid the context and we understand the trends that are emerging, increase in demand by end users, businesses trying to address the problems that they're trying to have to be competitive and stay faster and iterate. And to get to that desired state, you have to culturally change and enable your people product by using technology. Let's talk about GitLab and Google Cloud particularly, right? When we look at the landscape of development tools, right, this looks like a stereotypical kind of outline of what the enterprise looks like today. For most modern enterprises, development tool chains are, essential to keeping engineers and managers happy, right? Employees efficient and the business competitive, right? Without carefully coordinated combination of software development and IT operations, businesses risk the impact, the software release cycle, slowing them down, right? So this needs to be carefully curated, needs to be managed. It probably spans across multiple BUs. Each BU is managing their own set of tools. And if you don't carefully stitch that together and integrate it, you're going to have a hard time. It's inevitably going to add friction because everyone's in their own silo looking at one particular stage of development, right? One particular stage of creating the new feature and iterating the next release. So this doesn't work. Tool chains are complex and they're hard to manage. They increase cost. And then performance is impacted at the end of the day. So what we need is a single consolidated solution, because DevOps is a cultural aspect and a technology aspect. So how do we get one solution that can bring all teams together and one solution that can provide the functionality it needs across the board? And this is where GitLab shines, right? GitLab is a complete DevOps platform delivered as a single application. What that means is this is a one solution, one product that goes from, hey, I have an idea, I can plan out an outline and get it started, to, hey, I'm a developer, I'm going to take that idea and work with the product or project manager to commit code and develop that feature. And hey, I'm a QA engineer that I can work with the developer and see under the same solution, same application, what he's working on and collaborate with him to build out proper test cases and build out the CI/CD pipeline. To, hey, I'm a security engineer and I want to make sure we're not bolting on security after the fact. I want to move security left. As you're writing code, as you're importing dependencies, I want to make sure those vulnerabilities are scanned throughout that pipeline. So there's functionality across the board, right, for continuously improving the business with all the constituents involved that are vested in the next release, vested in the new feature that you want to roll out together. So a little bit of background. GitLab releases, if you're not familiar, GitLab releases a new release every month, the 22nd of each month, right? And so we use our own product, the dog food, to develop GitLab itself, and we also have a managed SaaS offering, Gitlab.com, that we host for enterprises and users and open source communities as well. And I'll talk a little bit more into that when we go into customer studies. I'll go into a little bit more detail about Gitlab.com. We're an open ecosystem. We're built on leading open source technologies. We have an open core, that's a community edition, and then we have an enterprise edition as well. And I'll be going over some of those functionalities shortly in the next slide. And we have a rabid user customer base, right? A lot of people use us, and they use us for several different functionalities. This is just a brief slide that kind of highlights just the tip of the iceberg, what GitLab is capable of across the board for DevOps, right? All the way from I have an idea and I can plan it, to code it, to build a pipeline, and secure it. So you might be familiar with some of these functionalities across other tools. So this is what GitLab can do, and you can view us online. We're a very transparent company. You can see the direction where the product is headed, and you can kind of see some of the things that are either in pipeline or were recently released, because like I mentioned, we release every month. So if you missed it, it's hard to keep up at times. But at the end of the day, I can give you a Swiss Army knife, but the solution that you build with that Swiss Army knife is going to be only as effective as the material you're working with. So if I gave you Swiss Army knife and sand, it's going to be very difficult to make a sand castle without water, right? Or it might be better if I just gave you concrete cement that you can shape and then let harden, right, pre-built. It really depends on the raw materials that you're using to build your cloud-native solution. And when I mean cloud-native, that doesn't necessarily mean only on public cloud infrastructure. Google released Anthos, and that clearly defines that cloud is not necessarily just in the air or in Google's data centers. It's also in your own data centers. It's also hybrid. It's also multi-cloud. Cloud-native is being more flexible, is being more integrated into managed services. It's a whole different way of architecting your solution, and that's what I mean by cloud-native. So the building blocks to be cloud-native are essential, and this is where Google shines, right? I'm sure you guys are familiar with their data centers. I'm not going to go at length at how they operate, how they serve their cloud, but as you know, your workloads on GCP are going to be running on purpose-built data centers, right? All the way from their Titan security chips, enforcing security at the lowest level, all the way up to tailored hardware and VMs that allow you to have flexible compute with live migration, all the way up to storage that's extremely fast and gives you various different options for cloud storage, object storage, persistent disk, you name it, right? And obviously, to name their global network. They've got, I don't know how many miles of fiber across the globe connecting it. So the cloud platform, the data centers is amazing. But what I find really interesting is their approach to their cloud native building blocks, right? It starts with open source projects, Kubernetes being one of the most popular ones. But if you're trying to build cloud native and containerization, Kubernetes becomes a de facto. But what if you want to incorporate AI ML? Well, we've got TensorFlow for that. What happens if you want to explore serverless for event-based functions? Well, you've got Knative for that. What about networking, hybrid connectivity, Istio for that, or container microservice networking and connectivity? We have Istio for that. So all of these are built on open source projects and open source technology. And this is compelling because of the open source nature of those projects. It allows you to see, one, transparency and visibility into that project and where it's headed. And if you opt in, you can contribute to it as well. But most importantly, you get the bleeding edge, right? This is the pioneering front of, say, Kubernetes. That's where the buck stops. Same thing with ML and AI. Like if you want to see what the latest is of that project, it's open source, you have visibility into it, you can get the latest code. Alternatively, based on those open source projects, you can also look at managed solutions that are the equivalent of, more or less, right? GKE, instead of rolling your own Kubernetes cluster from source, you've got a managed service for that. Same thing with serverless, you've got Cloud Run. So all these building blocks that Google provides to build cloud native solutions are out there and available, and they're backed by their open source counterparts, which allows you to have the bleeding edge, cutting edge solutions when you're looking to build net new. So with Google Cloud, you get all the building blocks. With GitLab, you get a way to operationalize and consume those building blocks and build something net new. So with GitLab CI/CD, you can automate that process for continuous improvement. With GitLab, with a unified experience, you can standardize across cross-functional teams for collaboration. A single pane of glass. Just like you reference someone on Slack with the @username, same thing with GitLab on code reviews, for example. Or QA, you can pull in the QA team by just referencing them along your workflow, whether it's an issue, an merge request, or the code that you commit. So you're becoming kind of like the center point for your DevOps, right? Center point for all your teams to kind of get together, collaborate, and unify and standardize on one solution versus a tool chain of solutions. And then lastly, I mentioned this before, security. It's at the heart of anything that you do in the cloud, right? Particularly if you're using if you're building an external service, you want to be secured by default, at depth, and shifted left. Running on Google Cloud gives you security at the infrastructure level, but running security testing through GitLab provides you security enforced at the software level and at the code level, at the source level. So combining all this is kind of what the solution kind of entails with GitLab and Google Cloud, right? So with both solutions together, you basically have something that enables flexibility for your organization, right? With the workloads, right, you've got Kubernetes, Knative, Cloud Run, what have you, container-based workloads, ML, AI-based workloads. You get the workload flexibility of how you want to arrange and architect. With GitLab, you get workflow consistency. Now you've got one single solution that you can kind of templatize what that pipeline looks like and involve all the teams that are relevant. So you're able to be flexible and adhere to the workflow that's required. And then you're continuous, right? A single DevOps application allows teams to unite and collaborate in one single pane of glass, continually improves as well via automation. For example, leveraging CI/CD, if you're not familiar with it, which can inject security functionality as well, as I mentioned. And then iterative. Remember how I said that fundamentally you need to solve problems differently? Instead of setting larger milestones that span multiple months or quarters, now you can kind of compress that cycle time by taking smaller, quicker actions and iteratively develop across teams because you're not burdened down with friction as much, right? So really you want to empower your teams to make rapid, smaller changes and align better with the business needs. And this is what you can kind of accomplish with GitLab and Google Cloud. So let's now hone into customer studies, right? Let's look at some of the proof points. Who's actually succeeded in doing this? It's not just small startups that are born in the cloud, they're able to be nimble. It's also about enterprises that are looking to transform and change. Over 100,000 organizations use GitLab at some capacity or another. One in particular that I want to share with you is Paisler. Paisler, also known as a networking monitoring company, helps customers monitor their entire IT infrastructure 24/7. To stay competitive in this emerging field and evolving field, right, they use GitLab for version control and continuous delivery. Paisler switched from Jenkins to GitLab and ramped up almost 4x more releases, right? But when they started this journey, reliability was erratic, stability for development was hindered. There was a lack of visibility as well. There's a quote in the customer case study. If you look online, you'll see that at times things would stop working, things would break, and developers couldn't pull or push code anymore. They didn't really know why, right? So there was a lack of visibility as well. So the solution, the first step was, well, they needed to first move away from Mercurial and move to Git, right? So that itself allowed a better landing spot to start developing, be more modern development practices, just simply by moving to Git. But when they start evaluating, well, where would they land their Git repositories? What better place than GitLab? Because with GitLab, with Git, you get CI/CD out of the box, right? So once you use Git on GitLab, you get the whole package. CI/CD that benefits QA and test teams as well by leveraging the automation process. The greatest outcome for their switch was significantly impacting their QA and test teams, right? They almost got 120x efficiency in just through the QA process because they were able to automate it. And they got that straight out of the box once they moved to Git on GitLab. The next case study, which I think is also very compelling, is Goldman Sachs, right? Goldman Sachs has an engineering group, which is part of the technology division and global strategy group that solves clients' engineering challenges, right? They build massively scalable software and systems. They architect low latency infrastructure solutions, proactively guard against cyber threats, and leverage machine learning alongside financial engineering to continually turn data into action. So they're very invested in the software development lifecycle, right, for their clients. So they adopted GitLab. They enable their teams to be self-serving. They enable their teams, right, to do thousands of daily builds. They enabled dozens of teams to deploy into production on a daily basis. That was a marked improvement. But when they started this journey, they realized they had to achieve velocity. They were kind of struggling to be fast and competitive. They needed to demolish the friction riddled with the tool chain that they had at that time, right? It added complexity for the development lifecycle. The firm had built its own tool chain, but it was looking for a solution to increase concurrent development. That means multiple teams can develop together and release together and collaborate together, right? Across multiple projects, sub-projects, etc. They wanted a modern tool set for managing code that developers came into the firm would already be familiar with. So instead of building something in-house, since a lot of developers are already familiar with Git and GitLab, whenever they recruited new individuals, well, they're more or less up to speed compared to the alternative. So the solution was they used GitLab for the ecosystem for development, right? It's not just, hey, I'm just going to store my code here. Hey, I'm not just going to use my CI/CD there. They used it for code review. They used it for planning. They used it for builds. They used it for testing. They used it for QA and deploying to production as well, right? All new strategic pieces of Goldman Sachs software development platform tied into GitLab, allowing for concurrent development and facilitating a single source of truth. So this became kind of like the cornerstone of their development. As a result, dozens of teams were pushing into production in less than 24 hours. That allowed them to iterate. You can only imagine, because they're able to do this quickly, they're probably taking small incremental change to continually develop and continually improve. Again, aligning with the business needs as needed. And this is kind of another example of where the technology is enabling people to build a better process. So the last two were, the hallmark of like a GitLab case study, right? Why use GitLab? What's DevOps? And how do we enable our teams? GitLab.com in particular is a good example of the latter half of what I was saying, building with the right building blocks, right? GitLab.com runs on GCP. And we actually migrated from Azure. For those of you who aren't familiar, GitLab.com provides a home to countless development projects across millions of end users. It's relied upon large enterprises as well to run mission-critical code or host mission-critical code and for development for their business. It's relied upon open source community as well to build and collaborate on new emerging technology. And GitLab.com functionally is our managed SaaS offering of GitLab, the product. So when we started to realize that GitLab.com, it's going to be a greater part of our business, and we're going to be double down on it, we need to first start with reliability, right? We had a goal of bringing GitLab.com to 99.95% availability to start with, site reliability, right? And simultaneously, at the same time of making it reliable, we knew we had to keep growing the business. That means adding new features and being able to address newer users and newer projects that are being onboarded. So there's a lot of stuff going on at the same time. So what we decided is, I'm going to keep the long story short because we actually do have a published case study on Google that you can look into details, and we also have a dedicated session that we delivered at Google Next in San Francisco earlier this year that will walk you through the detailed explanation of, hey, where do we start? how did we get to the conclusion, and what our final state was. But long story short, we decided that, well, the first step, we needed to land on a platform that was scalable and that could provide us that reliability that we needed. So we moved to GCP from Azure, and we saw immediate returns on stability for our .com business, right? We started by adopting cloud storage, moving away from NFS, and that was a strategic investment as well, and I'll touch on that in just a minute. But as we moved to cloud storage, we moved around 200 terabytes of data, right? Moving away from NFS backend. We leverage managed services like Cloud PubSub to stream log for analysis. We use Cloud Functions to give GitLab an easy-to-use platform for event-driven computing, to elegantly hand incident management and other tasks to maintain the platform as well. So again, we're using the right building blocks that's going to help our application kind of meet the business needs that we needed. And monitoring and visibility was a huge one. As a result, as soon as we migrated, we saw immediate improvement on stability and reliability, and really throughout the whole process, we tightened the collaboration with the Google technical team as well. And this included, engaging with PSO, engaging with support, engaging with sales, you name it, solutions architects. It was amazing just to see how we could collaborate together to kind of make this migration successful. And this step forward, moving to GCP, laid the foundation for our next frontier of being more cloud native as our .com grows. We develop and refine container and Kubernetes-based architectures. GKE we found to be one of the most robust solutions in the market to build on top of. So that was also part of the strategic decision making. So to add a little bit of context of when I said, there's a lot of things going on at that time, we decided, well, could we leverage some of the stuff that we're already building into the product to help with that migration, right? The first step was to be cloud native. We decided ultimately, Kubernetes is interesting. Could we lay the foundation to move more towards GKE or Kubernetes-based using Helm? This is a project that's still ongoing and actually something that you can try out yourself. We have Helm charts and Terraform charts. We have a solution paper that's available online that'll help you deploy GitLab on GKE backed with managed Postgres, managed Redis through Memstore, and hooking up Stackdriver to Prometheus. So you can see an enterprise-grade kind of deployment architecture on Helm. So that was one project that was going on. The second project that was going on with GitLab Geo. If you haven't heard of GitLab Geo, it's basically an application mirroring for GitLab instances, right? That includes Git, wikis, issues, user container images, you have it. So whatever you have in your primary site, you can take Geo and replicate into the secondary site. So we thought we would use Geo to kind of help with the migration. Have our Azure instance that's already in prod, mirror it in GCP, and then do the failover. However, it's not as easy as it sounds. And coming to that conclusion, kind of operationalizing that, it's much more cumbersome. We had many steps to iterate through, review, plan, test, because we just couldn't afford any significant downtime during the migration because everyone relies on the .com. All of our users rely on .com. So we use GitLab.com to plan it. We use our own product to kind of migrate the SaaS service to GCP for our product. So it's a meta discussion, if anything, where we're dogfooding our Geo product, Geo functionality, which we're coming out with, make sure it's validated and tested for our use case so we can trust it with our customers, and leveraging our .com to plan and iterate on the process. So this is kind of like the high-level overview of how we kind of maintained the Azure site and moved on over to GCP through our interconnect and VPN gateway and moved to cloud storage for storage, and then we use Geo to replicate and then do the migration. Clearly, there was a lot of operations involved to making sure that migration and failover was graceful, right? So we use GitLab to manage all of that. We use GitLab to create issue templates that became a blueprint of how we want to fail over. Then we created the issue that would basically plan out and give instructions to the team to kind of practice this failover. And then we actually executed it. And then we reviewed the outcome of that execution. Then we iterated on it over and over again until we got it perfect. And then we know this is go live, let's do it. And all of this can be tracked openly on GitLab.com. We've got our issue, we've got a migration project that you can actually visually track, read, and learn from our experience during our migration. These are just some stats, just giving you a quick overview of Pingdom. This is externally monitored availability of our solution, of our .com. You can't tell here, the blue is kind of hazy, but immediately after the failover, you can see the Pingdom values went down, which pretty much helped validate that we're getting 8.2 pingdom errors per day down to just 1 a day, right? And lastly, performance. This is actually a histogram. Here you can see the latency histogram, which helps show that red is GCP, where we have the more latency pings are actually lower in the spectrum. So we have fewer latencies or smaller latency on average, and it's a sharper cutoff, which predicted reliability as well. And then lastly, uptime. Again, we went from 39 minutes to 7 minutes downtime per week. So this was our story moving to GCP. Now you're probably wondering, well, where can you go to get started? Where can you go to learn more, right? The first thing I would do is definitely drop by our booth, pick our brains. We've got a few solutions architects at the booth that would love to talk to you. And come on down. If you have any questions, let's have a conversation. Let's talk about it. But if you want to start doing this offline, I would highly recommend checking out this guide. If you go on Deploy Enterprise GitLab GCP on a Google search, you'll see a solutions paper that tells you how you can deploy on GKE, for example. And if you want a demo lab environment, we also have a Quick Labs that you can that'll help you get started. It provisions you an environment. It tells you how to deploy GitLab, and then after you've deployed it, how to set up your first pipeline to kind of iterate on application development with a simple Hello World app, right? And then we also have Auto DevOps Demo. If you're not familiar with Kubernetes and you don't know where to start, well, we've got a functionality built into the product that will help you get started automatically when you start with your first commit. And then lastly, if you want some more evidence on some proof cases and proof points on how GitLab's adding value to the business, enterprises and SMB alike, check out our customer stories. At the very least, create an account on .com and try it out for yourself. With that, I'd like to thank you for joining and appreciate your attention. Thanks, everyone.